We are live. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Ar-Rahmanir Rahim. Maliki Yawmiddin. Iyyaka na'budu wa iyyaka nasta'in. Ihdina as-siratal mustaqima. Siratal ladzina an'amta alayhim ghayril maghdubi alayhim waladdallin. Ameen. Assalamu alaikum. I'm Muhammad Ali Saif Cheema, Chairman CPD Committee Lahore of NRC, and on behalf of committee, I welcome you all in today's session. Today's session is about post-pandemic challenges to Islamic financial institutions and impact of FAST 30. As you know, that there is a visible disruption in economic activities because of this pandemic, and all business segments are trying to deal with that situation. And the situation is likely to have an impact on the recovery of financing by IFIs and conventional banking too. To discuss on this topic, we have invited prominent speakers and panelists. Let me extend my welcome to Mr. Umar Mustafa Ansari Saab. Ansari Saab is the fellow member of ICAP and is serving as Secretary General of Accounting and Auditing Organization for Islamic Financial Institutions. He also served in different committees and task forces of ICAP, SPP, SECP. He is also a writer of many books on Islamic finance, and he contributed several articles in various newspapers and journals, and is also a regular trainer and speaker. Ansari Saab, welcome to the session. I also welcome our esteemed panelist, Mr. Haroon Tabrez. He's a fellow member of ICAP and currently serving as Chairperson Accounting and Law in IBA Karachi. Haroon Saab, welcome to the session. Our panelists also include Mr. Mubashir Naveed Saab. Mubashir Naveed Saab is fellow member of ICAP and currently serving as Head of Finance in Allied Bank Limited, Islamic Banking. Panel discussion would be moderated by Mr. Muhammad Tayyib Raza, who is fellow member of ICAP and currently serving as Head of Finance, Al Yusr Islamic Banking, Oman Arab Bank. So welcome to the session. Today's session would be chaired by Honorable Vice President ICAP, Mr. Rana Muhammad Usman Saab. To formally start the session, I request Chairman NRC, Mr. Dafkat Hussain Saab. Dafkat Saab, please, over to you.
Thank you, Ali. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Honorable Session Chair, Vice President ICAP Rana Muhammad Usman, distinguished keynote speaker and panelist, able moderator, my colleagues at NRC, worthy members, ladies and gentlemen, Assalamu alaikum and very good afternoon. On behalf of NRC, it is my privilege and pleasure to welcome all of you in this important webinar. Ladies and gentlemen, COVID-19 pandemic has caused a profound effect on how the society lives and works. Apart from various social implications, the pandemic has a significant impact on world economy. This is a unique situation. Every day we learn more and accordingly adapt our strategies. Coming to today's webinar, to sustain the financial sector, jurisdictions around the globe provided financial stimulus, regulatory relief, and waivers to the most affected sections of the society. The high uncertainty has led businesses, regulators, investors, and customers raising complex questions. Islamic financial institutions are different from conventional financial institutions in many aspects, especially that they have multiple stakeholders who share the profit or loss of the institution. The uncertainty is more challenging for Islamic financial institutions as they must ensure just and equitable treatments, which also need to be in line with the applicable Sharia principles and rules. To deal with certain pertinent accounting and financial reporting issues emerged due to outbreak of pandemic, AAB also issued various statements to provide clarifications for implementation of relevant financial accounting standards. To deliberate the challenges of practical application of FAS 30 during these difficult times, and to understand the key differences between FAS 30 and IFRS 9 from theoretical as well as practical perspective. We have organized this important webinar, which I am sure will be very beneficial for our practicing members and Islamic banking professionals. We have invited very eminent speaker and panelists for this session, and I am sure we are going to have a great session ahead. With this, I would like to thank our distinguished keynote speaker, panelists, moderator, and our session chair for taking time out of their very busy schedule and joining the webinar. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Rafkat Saab. Thank you very much. So it's a time for first keynote about post-pandemic challenges to Islamic financial institutions and impact of FAS 30. I invite Mr. Umar Mustafa Ansari Saab. Ansari Saab, over to you.
Thank you, Brother Lisa, and thank you, everybody. Thanks to the NRC for inviting me for this important event, and Brother Tayyab for coordinating all these things and being here as moderator today. With your permission, I'll share the screen now for the presentation. I hope it is clear to everybody.
We have invited prominent speakers and panel.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. It's a pleasure for me to be with my alma mater, ICAP, NRC today. This invitation was, to be honest, very much important for me, because, you know, wherever you are, wherever you live, whatever you do, but your origin always remains in your mind. So ICAP is my origin. So anything related to ICAP always gives me an inner pleasure and inner satisfaction that I'm able to do something and I'm able to contribute something to my own institute, which enabled me to be here, whatever position I have and whatever work I have been able to do. So thanks again for inviting me for this important discussion. For sure, some of the discussion points that we are going to have today will not be very much relevant to Pakistan's industry, because Pakistan is, as of now, is in a situation where some of the accounting treatments are in line with the AOFI standards, and some of the accounting treatments are in line with the local IFASs, with whatever have been implemented, and some treatments are in line with IFRS. So there is a combination, and to some extent there is a confusion as well. With regard to the legal framework, we need to understand that the 2008 circular of SBP is still valid, which says that AOFI standards should be used as a guidance, and a lot of accounting treatments that we have in accounting practices and policies in Islamic banks and other Islamic financial institutions, they are still in line with AOFI generally, like Salam treatment and some other treatments. We can go on detail for that, but that's not the subject for today's discussion. But I can understand that it's also important, not only from the perspective of what is applicable today, but we also need to understand what is the right treatment and what is the right way of doing things. And we hope that the level of adoption of AOFI standards will increase in Pakistan in future. So with that, I would like to take you through initially some discussion on FAS 30, and then before that, a very quick introduction to AOFI for those for whom AOFI is a new name. Accounting and Auditing Organization for Islamic Financial Institutions, AOFI, was formed in 1991 as a not-for-profit body. The head office is based in Bahrain. We have 140 plus active members. Total number of members is more than 210, but right now we have more than 140 active members from 37 different countries. We develop standards in 5 different areas: Sharia standards, accounting standards, auditing standards, governance standards, and codes of ethics. And in those areas, we have 115 standards which are in issue, means that these are effective as of now or have been issued yet to be effective, but does not include any superseded standards. We have 3 technical boards. There is a Sharia board, which develops Sharia standards, and there are 2 boards on accounting side and governance and ethics side. Auditing standards are also taken care of by the governance and ethics board. We have 28. There is a long detail on that. Because we are developing standards in a number of areas. So 28 means that we are talking about 28 jurisdictions, regulatory jurisdictions that adopt at least one set of AOFE standards in full. But we have more of these. Particularly, we have like nearly total number would be more than 38 of the jurisdictions that at least adopt AOFE at some level. And since we are doing it in different areas, in different by different boards, so the level of adoption cannot be determined in one single number. And more recently, we have worked upon a full footprint analysis of AOFE's standards adoption, and we are going to launch that report shortly. So it will be available on our website after 27th. But in a nutshell, we can say that there are nearly 38 regulatory jurisdictions that consider AOFE at least at a reasonable level, either as adoption or reference, or develop their own regulations based on our regulations. With regard to accounting in particular, there are 24 jurisdictions in 22 countries that adopt our accounting standards fully. And Pakistan is one of those that we consider that they are developing their own standards based on AOFE standard. Our IFAS 1 and IFAS 2 until IFAS 4 based in Pakistan are mainly based on AOFE standards. The treatments are quite similar to AOFE standards. And as I mentioned initially, that for other areas, SPP encourages IFIs to apply AOFE standards. The standards that we develop are a package deal, means that the Sharia is the backbone, but accounting actually provides the means as to how you need to implement and record and report those standards. Governance standards provide the governance and control mechanism to be in place for better Sharia compliance and the additional fiduciary responsibilities that Islamic finance has. Ethics is, we believe, ethics is the core, it is the spirit of Islamic finance. So for Sharia principles and rules, you can have legal compliance, but you cannot have the real compliance unless you go to the spirit. And we believe that one of the good documents that we have produced more recently is our new code of ethics. And I recommend all professionals to have a look at it, which provides very good understanding of the ethical requirements for Islamic finance professionals. And then we have the auditing standards, which actually ensure that all these standards have been properly implemented, and actually it includes the Sharia audit part as well. For sure, some of these areas need more discussion, but as we have a comparatively limited time, and we want to discuss maximum things within this limited time, so I'll not go in detail for some of the areas. One of this is our standard development process. I have shared the presentation with the organizers, so the presentation will be shared with all the participants after the event, inshallah. So I will, whatever areas I'm not discussing in detail are still there in the presentation, and I can be contacted for any further clarification whenever you want. One of the areas that is very important and which we are proud of is that our standard development process is in line with good practices. We have more recently benchmarked it with international other standard setting bodies as well. And Alhamdulillah, the process that we have is already very robust. And we would like to say that we even benchmark with the best practices, and we feel the process is good enough, although we are in a process of further improving it by introducing one more process for the public interest part. So considering these things, we need to understand that the standards that we are developing as of now, particularly now I will be coming to the accounting part, that these are comparable to the global best practices. These are comparable to the global standards. With regard to particularly on the accounting side, there is a lot of debate with regard to whether or not accounting is necessary or not. And I believe that before we go to the subject matter for today, we need to understand a little bit on this part, that what are our arguments, why we consider that Islamic finance accounting needs to be separate and needs to be distinguished from the conventional accounting, and in what areas. So very quickly, I'll go through some of the arguments which are in favor of that we don't need separate accounting standard for Islamic finance, and maybe IFRS or other generally accepted accounting principles are sufficient for that. For example, one of the most important arguments that we normally listen to is that accounting is neutral. It just reflects the business fact. And accounting is secular. It does not have any religion. And these are the arguments coming from the accountant side. And there are two arguments that are coming from some of the Islamic finance expert side who believe particularly, you can see that Malaysia is following IFRS, and there are some other countries as well. So they normally have these arguments as well, that in dealings, all is permissible unless specifically impermissible. So generally, accounting can be accepted as per general conventional norms. Secondly, there is an argument that accounting is post facto. It's not something that is ex ante, or it's not something that is fundamental to execution of transaction. So if the transaction is executed in a Sharia compliant manner, then whatever accounting is done, it does not affect. These are the arguments that we normally listen to from the no side, that we don't need separate accounting standards. However, we need to understand that on the AOFI's front, we have gone through long debates, long discussions. And more recently, we published a book as well. My co-author, Brother Harun, is also sitting today with us here. That is IFRS and Sharia-based reporting. In this book, we have identified the reasons and rationales as to why IFRS are not suited to reflect the Islamic finance accounting in a number of manners. So, whoever is interested in having more discussion in this topic can have a free to read access to this book on AOFI website. Quickly, I will go through the yes argument that as to why we consider that there is a need for Islamic finance accounting standards to be separate from the conventional ones. The first one is to address the specific information needs. Some of the information need, including the nature of transaction, including the permissibility of the transaction, including the requirements related to those depositors who have invested money on a profit and loss sharing, not only as a creditor. So all these information needs need to be addressed. Secondly, what is the real, true, and fair view of the transaction? Because the accounting has to reflect the business facts. And if the business facts are driven by Sharia requirements, then to what extent and in what manner these should be reflected, particularly what is a true sale, what is the timing of recognition of revenue, etc. Then it is about keeping the proper transaction trail, recording the things in the right manner. Unless you record the things in the right manner, in the right sequence, there is a big Sharia non-compliance risk that lot of transactions may be considered invalid from Sharia perspective if the right sequencing and the right transaction approach is not followed. And the same cannot be ensured unless you record the transaction in the right manner. One very important argument that we normally discuss with even those brothers who are non-Muslims, that it is about the risk profile of the transaction, that what risk the transaction is carrying. A conventional transaction may be carrying only a credit risk, while in Islamic finance transaction at different stages of transaction, you are subject to operational, market, credit, unsecured credit, and a lot of different risks. So these transaction profiles, the risk profiles of these transactions is different from the conventional part. Another important argument is that whatever timing of recognition of revenue is there, what is the time of transfer of risk and reward is there, these triggering points actually ensure that you distribute the right profit to all your right profits and losses to your stakeholders. So this is also very important. And last but not the least is the reputation risk to Islamic finance, that we need to understand this very important factor that Islamic finance has already so much criticism. And if you follow the conventional accounting saying in substance over form that all the transactions are essentially in their economic substance the same as conventional transactions, it means that you are putting Islamic finance industry into a big reputation risk. Again, some of the some of the topics that I'll be quickly touching upon today and need further discussion. So I have already recommended you the reading on that part. Very quickly, I'll go through some of the examples of the Sharia rules and principles that actually drive an accounting rule. And this is actually just a summary of some of the main considerations. For example, as I already mentioned about the timing of recognition of revenue, Sharia provides some rules which are with regard to what is the timing for risk and reward transfer. And unless the risk and reward is adequately transferred to the counterparty, you cannot recognize the revenue. And this revenue recognition timing is important for your accounting, and it's important for distributing the right amount of profits and losses to different stakeholders. Possession by agent, that what is the timing when you have a constructive possession and what is the timing when you actually have a sale. These are very important and crucial points which again determine the profits and losses and the timing of recognition of revenue. Sharia does not allow combination of two contracts or a contract and a promise. So in Islamic finance, a lot of transaction structures which are hybrid are allowed because the transactions are kept separate. So it is not possible for us that from Sharia perspective, we keep the documents separate, but we combine them together for the economic effect. Actually, we need to understand that if we do that, it's about making a hypocritic treatment, because if in Islamic finance, when two different documents are made or a bunch of documents is made, it's not only there to make fool of people, it's actually to be executed in the right manner. So we need to understand that these different transactions have different economic effects, and each one of them needs to be accounted for separately. Islamic finance, for sure, you know, the origin is prohibition of riba. If there is prohibition of riba, it means that the receivables cannot be discounted. Receivables cannot be sold against cash. They cannot be adjusted against cash. A receivable or any other monetary asset. There are a lot of conditions on that. So the main issue that the main result that comes out of it is that a lot of transactions, particularly whenever there is a monetary asset or financial asset, that cannot be discounted. So that discounting prohibition is very important. We have time value of economic resources versus time value of money. So we need to understand that wherever the economic resources are involved, there can be discounting effects, but whenever it's a monetary asset, it can never be discounted. Again, as I mentioned, this is a selected list of some of the important issues. One of them is very important, that is quasi-equity concept, that when Islamic finance obtains profit and loss sharing deposits, as we call in Pakistan, or globally what we call URIA, unrestricted investment accounts, or PSIA, profit sharing investment accounts, they actually have characteristics different from the conventional deposits, because the profit or the principal both are never guaranteed. So if you cannot have a guarantee, then and if they are actually having a residual interest in the net asset of the underlying pool of assets, so it means that their characteristics are different, essentially different from those of a liability, although they have a put option, and because of this put option, their characteristic is not similar to the common equity as well. So AOFI recommends, as in Pakistan, in Pakistan we call it redeemable capital in our existing IFASs what have been issued, but here we call it quasi-equity, which means that this amount is actually having more characteristics of a liability of equity, but having some characteristics of a liability. That's why it is kept separate. And this drives so many different accounting treatments, which are different from the conventional ones. I'll skip this slide for now, but we need to come for, now we'll come directly for IFRS 9. When IFRS 9 came, and before that IAS 39 was there were a lot of different aspects in that. Particularly when we considered that we need to update our standards and consider whatever has been brought in by IFRS 9, there were different areas of IFRS 9. So one was with regard to recognition and measurement of financial instruments, and our argument is that all our transactions are not financial instruments. They may have financial instruments at different stages, but at times they reflect the genuine asset. At times they reflect actually a share in the proportionate assets. At times it reflects the partnership in a transaction or in a venture. So considering all of it, we have different accounting standards which actually consider accounting for each product or the similar product separately. So we have standards on Murabaha, Ijara, we have standards on Salam, Istasna, all those products. We generally have individual standards on that. So the recognition and measurement part is considered there. With regard to Sukuk and other similar instruments, our recognition standard was FAS 25, which has been now improved to FAS 33 in line with some of the requirements of IFRS 9. Then there is impairment and credit losses requirement, for which we earlier had our FAS 11. Now we have FAS 30 for that. And for the reserves part, we have FAS 35. So this is one of the major projects that we completed in the last several years. Then we have on the derivatives on hedge accounting, we have a standard which is just shortly being issued on Wad Khiyar and Tahabut, that is promises, options, and hedging. So this standard is also being issued against IFRS 9. It will be covering that part of IFRS 9 and IAS 39, which is related to that. And then presentation of disclosure requirements of IFRS 9 and 32. We are revising our FAS 1, that is general presentation and disclosure in the financial statements of IFIs. We are covering most of these disclosure requirements there. So IFRS 9, you know, is a comprehensive standard and covers a lot of aspects of financial instruments. So we have divided that, as I mentioned, in multiple projects. And today we are talking about FAS 30, which is comparable to the impairment and credit losses requirements of IFRS 9. I'm sure there must be a lot of questions coming to your mind. So for sure, we will be having a discussion on those points. There were some very important issues with regard to Sharia compliance, and these issues, some of that I mentioned, that some of them actually drive the accounting rules from AOFI perspective as well. So what were the key issues that we considered while we were working on that? So first is real risk and reward and true nature presentation. The second is compatibility with other phases, product-based standards rather than class of transaction-based approach. The third was time value of money versus time value of economic resources, so avoidance of interest and other aspects, including indirect interest or similarity. Another part is reporting of then, which, according to Sharia, whatever is established receivable or payable is called a then. So reporting of then and reporting of tangible assets at the back end is one of the key concerns. Then reporting of correct value of assets and amounts of profits for the purpose of Sharia. Derivatives in most forms are not acceptable by Sharia. There are very limited forms of derivatives that are acceptable. So we developed our Wad Khiyar and Tahabut standard for that. Exposure draft was issued last year, but now we are going to issue it shortly, the final standard. And what and to what amount can be attributed to different stakeholders, and particularly with regard to provisions. Some of the provisions may be related to shareholders, and some of the provisions should be attributed to the investment account holders or the PLS depositors. So this is again one of an important aspect, because IFRS 9 particularly does not have this consideration. And with regard to, then we have this thing with regard to the reserves and provision, that all the things that were put are not provisions. Earlier, we had our standard number of FAS 11, which covered the provisions as well as reserves. So the forward-looking approach, this is something very important to see, that forward-looking approach, which is brought in by IFRS 9, actually AOFI had it in its standards for last maybe 15 plus years. In form of FAS 11, we already had the reserve requirement, although it was not a mandatory requirement, but it was a recommended requirement that IFIs should have a profit equalization reserve and investment risk reserve. And investment risk reserve, if you see, has the forward-looking approach. So this forward-looking approach, but we have kept it separate from provision, because provision becomes a liability, and we had kept it as a reserve because other generally accepted accounting principles were not accepting it as a reserve until the time IFRS 9 brought in the new concept of forward-looking approach for the purpose of provisions. Unless you all understand that IAS 39 and all other impairment and other standards in the past had the as of situation, not the forward-looking situation. Now I'll just touch upon very quickly that there are a few things which are at amortized cost, there are a few things at cost, there are other equity exposures as well. So if you see, from our perspective, the transactions, all the Islamic finance transactions are not the same. For example, Ijara, in Ijara, the substantial risk and reward incidental to ownership according to Sharia remain with the lessor till the end of the lease. So according to IFAS 2 in Pakistan and according to our old FAS 8 and in line with our new FAS 32, the treatment in the hand of the lessor is that the lessor records the tangible asset in its book. So can we say that it is also subject to credit risk? This might not be technically correct, because if on one hand you are recognizing a tangible asset and on the other hand you are saying that it is subject to credit risk and you start booking expected credit loss on that, based on the approach that is applicable on the financial instruments, that might not be the right treatment. So this is again one of the important consideration, that we understand that different type of products of Islamic finance and at different stages of transaction, the assets and assets are subject to different risks. For example, in Murabaha, initially we give our advance, which is an unsecured credit risk. This is given to the supplier. Then the goods arrive and we record a inventory, and which is subject to operational risk, as well as market risk, because the value can go down. And then it is sold to the customer, which is subject to a secured credit risk. All these situations are different. So an inventory cannot be subject to credit risk. Inventory has to be recorded subject to a net realizable value. Similarly, an asset in form of a Ijara asset should be subject to impairment. It should not be subject to expected credit losses. So our standard FAS 30 is called impairment, credit losses, and onerous commitments. And according to this, all assets, projects, etc., which are not receivable similar to IS 36, so this should be subject to impairment treatment in line with IS 36. And those receivables, which are like in form of receivables or in form of monetary assets, they should be subject to expected credit losses approach in line with IFRS 9. And there are some promises in Islamic finance as well. Like for example, in Ijara, although we have an asset in our books, but at the same time we may have a promise as well. So the promises, if the promises result in if they result in a onerous condition, that is there is a risk that you end up paying you end up in cash flows or economic resources going out of your entity. So in those situations, you need to consider the onerous commitments. So this standard actually comes up with those requirements with regard to impairment, credit losses, and onerous commitments. Some of the slides here I will skip. I will touch upon the PER, Profit Equalization Reserve, and IRR requirements under FAS 35, that we still go for further forward-looking approach for the sustenance and the long-term continuity of the banking system, Islamic banking system. So we still have this not as a mandatory requirement, but as a preferred requirement, that Islamic financial institutions should still continue to record, although some of the old IRR, investment risk reserve, that was maintained by Islamic financial institutions may be transferred to provisions, because earlier the provisions and impairment were not forward-looking and now they are forward-looking. So some of the forward-looking aspect that was covered as a reserve rather than provision may be transferred to that. Now I would like to touch upon the COVID-19 impacts, particularly with regard to some of the very crucial issues, and the most important and the most crucial issue was with regard to the payment moratoriums and deferments, which were allowed by different governments and regulators as a part of stimulus packages for the customers, for the revival and continuity of the economic system during this pandemic crisis. So we have come up with different situations. Again, there is not a single answer to that. In IFRS 9, you can have a single answer that whenever you have a deferment, it may be considered, if the impact is significantly material, it can result in re-recognition and then a recognition again of the new asset or liability. While in our case, while if it is not that much material, then you need to take a day one loss. And that day one loss has to be taken to the income statement, because you will be discounting the remaining cash flows according to the original implicit rate in the transaction. So it will result in a day one loss. However, from Islamic finance perspective, we cannot, number one, discount the receivables. That is one issue. Second issue is that all our impacts are not related to shareholders. Some of the impacts are actually passed on to the investment account holders or the PLS depositors. So the treatment that AOFI has brought in with regard to this one, considering all the Sharia requirements, all the practical considerations, and considering existing standards. One of the important part we would say is that we tested our standards in these times, our accounting, governance, Sharia standards in these times for their resilience as to whether they are good enough to be resilient in these difficult times, like whenever new issues are coming in, whether our standards were robust enough to provide answers to those issues. And Alhamdulillah, we consider that our standards were good enough. So this statement is actually providing clarification and interpretation of the existing standards, and it's not coming up with a new set of standard, or it's not issuing the new requirement. So it's not a standard, it's actually a statement. We considered for the receivables part, you need to recognize the loss that will be there according to, so the remaining deferred profits that you have will be amortized over the remaining period of transaction. So the effect of that day one loss as per conventional will be passed on to different stakeholders over a period of time till the maturity of the transaction. So this, we believe, is the right treatment and the better treatment. And obviously, this topic is, I would say that this topic alone is worthy of a 3 hours discussion. And actually, we had more than those. We had multiple discussions, including a market interaction session as well before we finally issued. With regard to Ijara, the situation is different because the Ijara asset is already in your books and it is being depreciated. So what will happen that actually the revenue recognition in Ijara transactions will go over a period of time. And if the pricing is also affected, then that will be taken into consideration. So we have two conclusions on that part. And if the pricing is not affected, then at least over the revenue will be recognized over a period of time, over the remaining period of time or the extended period of time. And the depreciation also will be charged over the extended period because the useful economic life of the asset for the entity has also increased as a result of that. So these are the considerations, except for one situation where that Ijara tenure is not increased, only a deferment is allowed. So in that situation, we do not allow depreciation to be extended further. Then there are these conclusions are related to that, and this presentation will be shared with you, and the statement is available on our website already. With regard to other payment moratoriums, because most of the other transactions, including Mudarba and Musharka, etc., have their own considerations, and the standards already cover those situations. So we said that it should be done in line with the relevant FAS. For sure, we have come up with some additional disclosure requirements. We have recommended there should be additional risk-related disclosures and disclosures related to these moratoriums, etc. So these need to be handled. There is another situation where there is a settlement in line with the execution of a new transaction. Again, here we have some difference from the conventional IFRS 9 because the derecognition criteria for them is different. So in the first situation where you have a moratorium, we are not derecognizing, we are not giving the option of derecognition according to our existing standard. But if there is a new transaction against a past transaction settlement, so the past transaction has to be settled in line with the requirements of the earlier standard, and the new transaction is to be recorded as a new transaction in line with the new standard. It can be, for example, a Murabaha settled and a new Murabaha issued, or it can be a Murabaha settled and a diminishing Musharka issued. So both will be, both of these will be considered in line with settlement of the first transaction and issuance of and recording of a new transaction in line with the relevant FAS. So the early settlement, if there is a loss situation in early settlement, that has to be recognized in the settlement of the first transaction. Government grants and subsidies, including the rate benefits, etc., should be, we do not have a separate government grants standard. So we have suggested the treatment more or less in line with existing IFRS requirements. There are in some countries there were regulatory loans to the IFIs, either interest-free loans or zero-return repos. Both from conventional standpoint may be considered as the same transaction, but from our perspective, both of them are to be considered separately. Fard Hasan transactions, and that is interest-free loan transactions, are not to be discounted. From the conventional standpoint, you need to discount them and you need to record them initially at fair value, then you have to unwind the discount. However, from accounting perspective, as per AOFI standards, we do not have a discounting option for the monetary assets, so this transaction will not be discounted. With regard to zero return repos, a Sharia compliant repo is a sale transaction, true sale transaction at one end and a promise on the other end. So it cannot be combined together like a conventional repo transaction, which is considered to be a collateralized lending rather than a sale transaction. So we consider that first sale has to be an absolute sale and it has to be recorded as an absolute sale. And with any profit or loss, if there is a margin, that there can be a loss situation on that as well. And then there is a promise to purchase, and which will be recorded in line with the relevant standards once the transaction is actually consummated, when the promise is converted into a purchase. With regard to expected credit losses, we allowed that that merely a payment moratorium by the government is not equivalent to increase in credit risk, merely that. But you need to reassess other situations of the customer, and if other situations of the customer are okay, then in that situation you are not going to increase the credit risk or transfer from stage 1 to stage 2 or stage 2 to stage 3 only by mere number of days extended because of the moratorium. So we provided that exception in that area. And with regard to impairment of asset, we considered some of the specific requirements. I'll skip some of the important things. One important aspect is significant and prolonged decline in value of investment. Again, more or less similar to what we said on the expected credit losses. We said that merely an increase or delay in payment or increase in number of days is not a reflection of the fair value through equity. So if you had in line with our FAST 25, if you had an investment which is carried at fair value through equity, and you have a formula for significant and prolonged decline in value, then in that situation you can consider these number of days not to be counted for that purpose. So with that, I would like to conclude on this part of the presentation, and we'll just quickly take you through the governance board challenges that we considered on the governance side of Islamic financial institutions. This I want to cover very quickly because I believe that this is one of the important messages that has been communicated from AOFI to the Islamic finance industry and to the practitioners. We identified the role of the board of directors and other organs of governance, and we considered that they need to be more active and proactive in this time. With regard to the payment moratoriums and deferment, we mentioned that even if it is not a regulatory requirement, but according to the teachings of Quran and teachings of Islam, the Islamic financial institution should provide payment moratoriums and deferment to their customers, and this should be done voluntarily. Even if it is not a mandatory requirement, it should be done. With regard to the Sharia governance, we identified some of the important aspects that we noted are coming up in these difficult times, and Sharia board and other Sharia governance organs have to be more active in this time, particularly with response to the issues and with regard to all of these settlements and reschedulings, rollovers, etc. One very important aspect we identified is about the considerate and fair dealing with the employees in these times, that organizations and Islamic financial institutions should try and endeavor their best to make sure that the dealings with employees in these times are fair and considerate. They should avoid firing employees to the maximum extent possible. They should avoid reducing salaries to the maximum extent possible. But if it is inevitable because of the business facts and realities, then it should be done on a fair basis, on a transparent basis, without any biases and without any sort of bias. And then we identified a very important point that Islamic financial institutions around the globe have their own charity funds coming out of impermissible income, and it is the right time that they use a charity fund for these purposes. And we believe that this is one of the important aspects. With that, I would like to conclude, and I tried to shrink the presentation and reduce the time. But you know, this was a very important and detailed subject, so I'm not sure that I was able to like completely stick to the time requirements. But my apologies for that. But thanks for giving me this opportunity. Thank you very much, and I'm available for further discussions and questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Umar Saab, for giving us such a detailed and insightful presentation in such a short time. We know that we have time constraints. So it's a time for panel discussion. I request Mr. Muhammad Tayyib Raza, who is FCA and Head of Finance at Al Yusr Islamic Banking, Oman Arab Bank, to take over the session. Tayyib Saab.
Thank you very much, Ali, for giving me this opportunity to moderate this session. And a very warm welcome to our panelists again. I believe we are fortunate to have a very well-balanced panelist from regulator, from academia, from the industry. So we'll have the listeners find it a very useful discussion. So let me start my discussion with Mr. Mubashir. So Mr. Mubashir, of course, being an industry professional, you have quite a good watch on the industry numbers. So could you please enlighten us that how the Islamic financial institutions performed in Pakistan compared to the conventional banks in this pandemic time? So how good are the numbers actually as a comparative if we see?
Yeah, thank you, Tayyib. Basically, it is a fact that Islamic banks are very younger as compared to conventional banks globally and especially in Pakistan. So if we see the business side of the Islamic banks and conventional banks, Islamic banks after outbreak of this COVID-19 have continued to gain the market share in overall banking industry. If we see the numbers of first half year here in Pakistan, the growth in advances and deposits of Islamic financial institutions have gone up comparing with overall banking industry share. So we can say that Islamic banking industry has captured additional market share during this period of pandemic. Another reason that's why Islamic financial institutions are better placed than conventional banking institutions, I think, is the structure of the transactions of the Islamic banking institution. The assets of the Islamic banking institutions are more secure and more, the nature of the transaction is such that securitization is better than of conventional banking. But if we see the overall operational side of the Islamic banking and conventional banking, I think conventional banking have advantage here in operational side because they are Islamic banks are relatively newer in the market. They have conventional banks have very strong infrastructure. In situation like this pandemic, customer want to have these solutions on their mobiles and laptops. They don't want to go to the branches of the banks to execute their transactions and fulfill their needs. So conventional banks had very strong infrastructure, and Islamic banks, being the smaller part of this industry, they had relatively weaker infrastructure. Islamic financial institutions need to digitalize their products and services so that customer can have solution of their product for the needs on their mobile phones, on their laptops. This is the area I think Islamic financial institutions need to invest more, need to work more to digitalize their products to make themselves compatible with the conventional banking institutions.
Thank you very much, Mubashir, for this insight. And before I move to Mr. Harun Tabriz, the second question for you. See, there is a gap. Pakistan is now implementing IFRS 9 and FAS 30 now. But if you see, currently the regime of provisioning is very rigid as per the SPP guidelines. So when we move to IFRS 9 or FAS 30, it gives a subjective assessment. So every bank will have an own rating, own loss given default parameters, own probability of default things. So that will be a quite subjective matter. So in this regard, I have two questions for you. What does State Bank of Pakistan allowed that this model, IFRS 9 or FAS 30 model, need to be assessed by the auditors in a given period of time? And secondly, what based on your gap analysis you see how much it will be different, the ECL requirements, how much it will be different than the existing SBP provisioning requirements? How much the gap you can see in these areas?
Basically, the existing model of provisioning as per the prudential regulations of the State Bank of Pakistan, it is on the basis of, you can say, incurred loss approach. When you have, your assets have gone into default, you need to provide for debt against that default. But in the ECL model, banks can better prepare themselves for the future expected losses, and especially after the financial crisis of 2008, it was the need to make a such model that financial institutions don't have to take sudden losses, which will be very harmful for their financial health and for their bottom line. Expected credit ECL model basically suggests that you assess your assets on every reporting period and create reserves so that any unexpected loss which may occur in the future will be helpful for the financial institution to absorb that shock. On the other side, when in Pakistan, IFRS 9 or FAS 30 is going to be implemented, I think there will be an issue because it has to be implemented retrospectively. And when you will implement it retrospectively, you will have to take a huge amount in the reserve. And that is going to hit your retained earnings. And basically, you have to comply with the minimum capital requirements and capital adequacy ratios also. So, the weaker banks, which have lesser equity base, may suffer in this situation. The banks which are already on the borderline to meet their capital adequacy ratios and the other capital requirements will be in difficulty to meet these CAR, leverage ratio, or other capital requirements. So smaller banks with lesser equity will have to, maybe they will require additional injection of capital to maintain their capital requirements as per regulatory or other Basel requirements.
Okay, thank you very much, Mubashir, for your insight. Taking advantage of Umar Bhai's presentation, I'd like to move to Mr. Harun. Mr. Harun, as Umar Bhai mentioned, a very huge difference between IFRS 9 and FAS 30 is that FAS 30 divides assets into three categories: the investments, the receivables, and the other investments. So on this one, it suggests three different methodologies for this one. Could you please little bit enlighten our audience on these three approaches which FAS 30 has taken compared to IFRS 9?
Yes, IFRS 9 is a considerably larger standard, covers financial assets, liabilities, impairments, hedging, etc., etc. FAS 30 is only about impairments and credit losses. We don't have hedging incorporated in FAS 30. We would be issuing a new Wad and Khiyar standard, just like Brother Umar said earlier. Maybe by end of this year, that would cover the hedging part. Now, coming to the impairments, the normal impairment standard in IFRS is IS 36, but the financial assets are now part of FAS 30, and we use this a similar approach, which is in line with IS 36. That is the recoverable amount, value in use, or the fair value less cost to sell for these assets. The second part is that for inventories, we would be using the net realizable value, just like IS2 does, because inventory is covered in IS2. And in relating to the financial liabilities or the receivables, FAS 30 uses the concept of expected credit losses, as you just have discussed earlier also, which would have two different classifications. One which is over the life of the expected credit loss, and the second is over the next 12 months, and it depends on the kind of risk that you estimate for them. And similar to IFRS 9, you would be classifying this into three different stages: stage 1, stage 2, and stage 3, which depends on how much delay is there in the contract.
Very much, sir. I'll come back to you. I'll engage Umar Bhai for another question. Umar Bhai, in your presentation, you have highlighted a very important aspect. That is that on the balance sheet of the Islamic financial institutions, there are some instruments, of course, high equity instruments that are not present in the conventional financial instruments. And FAS 30 allows that some of the ECL to be charged to the equity holders as well. This is a big deviation which for the Islamic financial institutions compared to IFRS 9. I would like a little bit more discussion on this point, because this will affect the investment account holder or the participatory account holders in this case. So a little more discussion, I believe, from your side will help our audience to understand this point.
Thank you, Brother Tayyib. Now, if you allow me, just to go a little bit back, what is the contract between a URIA account, or the what we call in Pakistan PLS deposit account, and the bank? The contract is profit and loss sharing. Your money is invested in a pool of assets, and that pool of assets actually belong to you. Actually, you have a residual interest in that. So according to whatever formula we have, and particularly in Pakistan, I would say that pool management guidelines that were issued in 2012, these are one of the best available in the world, if you see, and they're very comprehensive and very clearly identifying what are the respective risk and reward attributable to different stakeholders. So we need to understand that if I have taken money from you and invested into some avenue, and if there is a loss, if there is no breach of contract from my side, or there is no negligence on my part, then that loss pertains to you. So these losses are pertaining to the investment account holders or the PLS depositors. Now, what is the stage when that can be passed on? If there is a final loss situation, or it can be passed on at a different stage situation. In Pakistan, as of now, it is allowed to be passed on at the final stage only. But according to AOFI Sharia standard and according to AOFI accounting standards, it has to be passed on from time to time. So what our standard says on this side is that whenever you have a loss, for example, if you had investment of 100 and that investment was 80% funded by the investors and 20% by the shareholders. So in that situation, 20% of the loss, if the loss is without negligence or breach of contract on part of the bank, then that 80% loss has to be passed on to the customer. Now, this means that, and this is universal, the rule is universal. If you from Malaysia to Saudi Arabia, if you find out the rule remains the same, that these losses are pertaining to that. And however, how these are actually implemented in different countries might be different. So in a nutshell, that loss is attributable to them. Now, again, we recommend the practice that we have is the better practice, because we are going for the forward-looking approach, because we are not going for one-day losses. What happens that if there is for the whole time, I do not book a loss, and at one given point of time, there is a final write-off situation. So I pass it on the whole write-off as of that date to those account holders. So what will happen that in that given month or in that given quarter, some of them may end up in a loss or a significant loss of earning because we were not prudent in our accounting. So the standard recommends a prudent basis of accounting in which this is done in an important manner. Brother Tayyib, if you allow me 1 more minute on a very important point, that previously, we need to understand that previously accounting standards, conventional ones also did not allow a forward-looking approach. They said whatever you need to book is as of position, what is a loss as of. However, they come up with a future position, and what was the accounting justification for that? One justification was that the European Union was asking for it, so accounting standard set is developed standard as per a requirement of European Union. But the second answer to that is that there was a justification, technical justification, and the technical justification was that whenever we do a transaction in banking, we have a rate that is charged, and the rate includes the credit risk element, and the credit risk element that I'm charging in my revenue, it is building up in my revenue. So that credit risk element includes the credit risk till the maturity of the transaction, till not as of the balance sheet date. So whatever credit risk I'm carrying till the maturity of the transaction should be, since it is part of the revenue, it should be part of the expenses as well. That is the right matching concept. That was the technical justification for this forward-looking approach. We applied the same forward-looking approach while developing FAS 30. So the same applies there, that today I am distributing profit to my customers, but there is a risk that there will be a credit loss going forward after 2 years or 3 years in the same pool of assets that is there. So till maturity, the risk of loss, whatever is there, should be spread evenly over a period of time. And that is what our accounting treatment is.
Thank you, Murray. Thank you very much. हमारा एक क्वेश्चन है, हमारे एक मेंबर ने एक पॉइंट की तरफ इशारा किया है. उन्होंने कहा कि आपकी प्रेजेंटेशन के अंदर तकाफुल का एलिमेंट मिसिंग था, और इस्लामिक सर्विसेज के अंदर तकाफुल भी एक इम्पॉर्टेंट हिस्सा है. तो थोड़ा सा अगर आप तकाफुल के ऊपर थोड़ा सा गाइडेंस दे दें, तो दैट विल बी गुड फॉर द ऑडियंस.
According to AOFI, for all our standards, we consider a definition of Islamic financial institutions, and that includes takaful, mutual funds, other Islamic capital market institutions, in addition to banks, as well as it includes a window or a department or a division that functions as an Islamic financial institution within a conventional bank. So the definition is the same. What we do, we generally develop standards on an overall basis, like our framework applies to all of them. However, with regard to specific requirements on accounting, we issue a separate one. So in our governance standards statement or our accounting standards statement, whatever we have mentioned applies to takaful as well. But we know that this issue of payment moratoriums was not related to takaful. It was more related to banks and similar Islamic financial institutions who are doing banking or similar to banking services. So in a nutshell, unless there is a very specific requirement, we do not identify it separately. As of now, we have 4 accounting standards on takaful. One handles the general presentation and disclosure. Then there is one on contributions, surplus, and provisions and reserves. We are undergoing a comprehensive revision project, and inshallah, shortly we will be issuing exposure draft of the new standard, which will be considering the requirements of IFRS 17 as well.
जी हारून भाई, मेरा आपसे क्वेश्चन ये है कि FAS 30 जो है वो एक सब्जेक्टिविटी देता है हर बैंक को, हर इस्लामिक फाइनेंशियल एक सब्जेक्टिविटी देता है कि वो अपना एक रेटिंग मॉडल डेवलप करे, अपना एक PD डिफाइन करे, अपना LGD डिफाइन करे. तो ये सब्जेक्टिविटी है, उसकी वजह से हर बैंक्स के यूनिफॉर्मिटी नहीं आ पाएगी इस सारे के अंदर. यूनिफॉर्मिटी जो है वो दिस इज वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट फॉर रिपोर्टिंग एंड प्रेजेंटेशन पर्पसेस. इस इशू को, इस कंसर्न को कैसे एड्रेस करता है FAS 30 और रिपोर्टिंग साइड के अंदर से?
पर्सनली आई डोंट थिंक कि इससे कोई बहुत बड़ा डिफरेंस पड़ता है. सब्जेक्टिविटी का जब हम वर्ड यूज करते हैं तो वी गो इनटू वन एक्सट्रीम. इट्स एक्चुअली नॉट लाइक दैट. Subjectivity is about the process itself. That how would you determine it? For example, the current situation in Pakistan is that if there is a delay of 30 days, I will not go and find out expected credit losses for the future. There is a fixed amount that I will record as a loss. यहाँ पे कोई subjectivity नहीं है, एक objective amount हमने loss के अंदर record किया. Now, जो आपका question है, एक model अगर एक बैंक इस्तेमाल कर रहा है, तो दूसरा बैंक उससे कोई बहुत different model use नहीं कर रहा. Certain variables would be there, and we would calculate the amount of loss based on those variables. अब वो variables कौन से हैं, ये तो model almost दुनिया में एक ही तरह के होते हैं. अगर हम पाकिस्तान में भी आज मॉडल लेना चाहेंगे तो हम बाहर किसी एक अच्छी ऑर्गेनाइजेशन का मॉडल उसको बेंचमार्क बनाकर और फॉलो करना शुरू कर. सो पर्सनली आई डू नॉट थिंक कि इसमें कोई इतना बड़ा वेरिएशन आ जाएगा. यस, वेरिएबल्स की वजह से थोड़ा सा डिफरेंस हो सकता है. अदरवाइज
Brother Tayyab, if you allow me to add just one sentence to that, in IFRS 9, if you see the number of days for the staging transfer are not given in the body text, they are given in the guidelines. But in our FAS 30, the staging requirement has been put, like a number of days for staging requirement has been put as a rebuttable presumption. Okay, ये rebuttable presumption है, but the number of days requirement is there. So this is actually reducing that subjectivity to a significant level. Because you cannot just put, okay, मेरे अगर पूरा साल नहीं होता मैं कुछ नहीं करूँगा. The number of days requirement is there, and there has to be a rebuttable, like you must have a strong rebuttal to that, and if you don't want to follow that requirement.
And brother Tayyab, अब इस point से मैं एक question उमर भाई के लिए भी raise करता हूँ. You forgot to discuss the equitable distribution, which is very important in Islamic context. क्योंकि इसकी वजह से लॉसेस रिकॉग्नाइज करने में थोड़ा सा डिफरेंस क्रिएट हो जाता है फ्रॉम द कन्वेंशनल बैंक्स. तो इक्विटेबल डिस्ट्रीब्यूशन को भी जरा थोड़ा सा डिस्क्राइब कीजिए.
Okay, with your permission, Brother Tayyab, actually equitable distribution need to be seen from different parties' perspective. Some people will say that, okay, it's not equitable because you are booking a future loss today. But you need to understand at the same time that it might not be justified to put hold of the loss at one day when actually you go into write-off. So actually, some people have a view that there should be no loss till the time you don't do it. Similarly, what would be the ratio of income? Like for example, today I have an investment of 500 and tomorrow maybe I may have an investment of 50,000. So today I'm taking less loss, and future I was supposed to be take a major loss. For that, we have a Sharia requirement as well. We have a constructive liquidation option. Constructive liquidation means that whenever we do profit distribution for Islamic financial institution on a monthly, quarterly basis, our contract with the customer says that this is considered to have a constructive liquidation where we settle off the amounts and we start the new ones. So actually, this also takes into consideration some of that point, because the person going out or the person putting in further investment are all aware, according to the contractual requirements, that they are taking that risk. But again, this equitable distribution will always be having a subjective mentality attached to that, because there is no one single solution for that. And we believe that based on the Sharia principles and based on the regulatory requirements that we have seen generally, whatever we propose is more or less as close as possible to the equitable distribution as we could think of.
Thank you, Arun bhai, for offering this question. This was actually the part of that question which that part I missed. So I would like to now come back to Mr. Mubashir. So Mr. Mubashir, you rightly mentioned that the difference of the calculation of ECL between FAS 30 or IFRS 9 and as per the norms of Central Bank, State Bank of Pakistan, they will be going to the hitting to the equity and retained earnings. What we would also like to enlighten our participant, what would be the impact on the income statement? Because now the income statement for the period will be directly linked to the ECL calculation. The calculations of as prudential norms will not go to your income statement anymore. So can you please, based on the gap analysis, on any surveys you have done, what is the likely impact on of the income statement of the banks in Pakistan based on the new ECL calculation?
Yeah, basically, when we will implement IFRS 9 or FAS 30, on the date of implementation, the amount of charge on assets will be transferred to will be adjusted to in the retained earnings. That will not impact the PNL of the institution for that time, but the charge you will account for during the period which is concerned. The additional amount which will be taken as a charge, that will hit your PNL, and that will directly adjusted in the income statement of that institution. So opening balance, on the date of implementation, the amount of charge that will be derived will be adjusted in retained earnings, and the charge which relates for that period will be adjusted in the income statement of that institution. So if suppose in 2021 this standard is implemented, the charge that pertains to the outstanding exposure on 1st January or 31st December 2020 will be adjusted in retained earnings, and the additional charge taken into the income statement. That additional amount will directly hit the bottom line of the financial institution.
This is very correct. What I'm trying to...
I want one comment here with your permission. I know that it's not good to interfere, but it's a very important discussion that we had our board level. And I think that it's very important to share. Actually, the banks will end up earning more. How they will end up earning more? Let me explain. Number one, whatever total losses are going to be there over a period of time, they will be equal. Because the provisioning is actually a timing effect. The total number of losses over a period of, for example, 100 years will be the same. Let's take an example of 100 years. It will be the same. But what is happening in the countries where IFRS 9 is being implemented, that every bank across the board is increasing the premium on risk. So the pricing is increasing because we have to take more capital, we have to put in more capital, we have to put in more provisions. So the pricing is increasing across the board. The risk premium has increased. So if you were charging risk premium of 1%, you are charging now a risk premium of 1.25 or 1.3. Now, assuming that over a period of 100 years, the total losses remain the same, what will happen? Eventually, you end up earning more. So actually, it's not the bank who are going to be affected by IFRS 9. It's actually the customer and the economic system that is being affected by IFRS 9. This is a very important debate that we need to understand, that it's actually impacting the customer and the banking system and the economic system. It's actually adding up to the profit of the banks eventually. And this is like a very important debate that when any country adopts IFRS 9 or adopts FAS 30, they need to understand this aspect.
Yes, Omar bhai, thank you very much. Actually, this is the point. From this perspective, I raised the concern of subjectivity, because we have seen this by the implementation of IFRS 9. The profits are now in the hands of the banks. Banks can control their profitability by changing their rating models, by changing their probability of defaults and loss given defaults. So if one customer which is in stage 2 to stage 3 movement can impact the bank significantly much more than it was earlier before. So that staging requirement is very important. Okay, Omar bhai, let's further discussion. There is a concept of SICR, significant increase in credit risk, in IFRS 9. And based on those, every central bank has issued some guidelines how to monitor it. The significant increase in credit risk, the guidelines are given. Is there any such guidelines are available from AOFI attached with FAS 30?
There was a conscious decision on our part that we do not want to issue any guidelines as of now. We want to issue guidelines after some time when these things are actually tried and tested. Till the time guidance is not available according to AOP framework, you can refer to IFRS or other country standards if they are not contravening Sharia. So till the time that is not there, but with regard to number of days requirement for significant increase, we have made it part of the standard, not issued guidelines separately, but rather only this part about a number of days, which is one part of the significant increase in credit risk. We have included it in part in the standard because we considered it very fundamental to consider, subjectivity to be curbed on that part. But other than that, we know that we need to issue some guidelines, but we are waiting because what happened in some countries, it was adopted, but for some countries it's still not adopted, and because of COVID we have further given some time because this year was the year when it was supposed to be adopted for the first year, but for some countries where regulators required, it was adopted earlier, but because of COVID we allowed further time on that. So I cannot say that we have a comparative study of data available as of now, so it may take 1 to 2 years, after which we will be able to issue guidelines if needed. Otherwise, for the time being, whatever guidance is needed, you can refer to IFRS.
So Bashir, any such guidelines are available or issued by State Bank of Pakistan to monitor the significant increase in credit risk? In that case, even the customer is stage 1 or stage 2, but based on the significant increase or certain parameters given by the State Bank, it can be classified or downgraded to the next level of staging.
Basically, as per prudential regulations of State Bank, provision is required to be charged at the level of stage 3, that is proposed in FAS 30 and IFRS 9. But after implementation of these standards, IFRS 9 or FAS 30, your every asset will be tested for the impairment or tested for the ECL. So even your asset has no significant increase of credit risk, you have to test for impairment, test for ECL, and account for that charge into your P&L. Umar Saab rightly said, although if we see in totality, there will be no extra charge which will be taken by the financial institutions, and it will be only timing difference. After implementation of these standards, financial institutions will be accounting for the charge in advance to prepare themselves for any unexpected shocks that may happen in future due to any type of circumstances.
Okay, thank you very much, sir. Now I have an academic question to Mr. Haroon Tabriz. Sir, when a student of finance open the IFRS 9 and try to compare with FAS 30, it will find that two very basic things are which IFRS 9 discussed, like the business model of an entity, equity-based securities, debt-based securities, and SPPI criteria. Nothing we find those equivalent in FAS 30. I believe there will be some conscious, discussion on this one, not included into this one. Can you just highlight on this point?
The concept is, and this is the question which students ask me also. It's not right when you say that these I would say products are not there in IFRS 9. The Sharia compliant products, they are termed differently in FAS 30. So yes, we would have the same concepts, but with slightly different terminologies. The only difference is that we have a separate class of equity, you would say, and the quasi-equity, the unrestricted investment accounts, which the IFRS does not recognize. The deposit holders, the profit and loss depositors. So that would be the only difference. Otherwise, I don't see any difference in the products. When you compare both of them, there is no. Tayyib, you are mute.
Yes, I have a question for Mr. Mubashir, and I believe this might be the last question because the allocated time given to the panel discussion is over. So, Mr. Mubashir, one of our members is asking that he is saying that I will read the question. Would you agree with me that although infrastructure for Islamic banking is small as compared to conventional banking, as you mentioned, but Islamic banking and takaful are the ultimate economic future globally, as these are mushroom growing as the financial risk are mitigated? Let me quote here that in post-pandemic, top 4 EFU sales performance in whole Pakistan is takaful coverage as compared to the EFU life insurance. So he's trying to say that Islamic banking is growing more rapidly, not in the financial, in the banking as well as takaful. So despite, as you mentioned, they have some challenge on the digital front, but they are growing on the rapid pace.
Yeah, Islamic banking is continuously capturing its market share. Obviously, it is being captured from the conventional banking financial institutions. If you see the historical numbers, even as I said, if you see first 6 months numbers of this year after outbreak of Corona, Islamic banking financial institutions have further strengthened themselves into the market in terms of deposits, in terms of advances, in terms of branch network. But in totality, as market share of the Islamic financial institutions is relatively lower than conventional banking institution. I was trying to say that on the operational side, Islamic financial institutions need to invest more, need to work more to digitalize their products, to provide, they must try to know what customer want, what are the needs of the customer. And conventional banking institutions are working from hundreds of years, and they have strong infrastructure, they have innovative products, they have more digital solutions, and Islamic banks are also providing such type of facilities, services, and digital products. But I want to say the infrastructure of Islamic banks is inferior than the infrastructure of the conventional bank. And they need to focus more on this side to improve their infrastructure, to digitalize their products, to provide solution to the customers on their doorstep, on their mobile phones, on their laptops, because now customer don't want to go to the branch and stand in the queues for payment of his utility bills. He just want to have a solution on his mobile or laptop. He's sitting at the home and paying all of his utility expenses and managing all of other needs. So Islamic financial institutions need more focus, more investments, and more effort to bring themselves compatible with the conventional banking institutions.
Thank you very much, Mubashir, and thank you very much all the panelists. Here we conclude the panel discussion, and my sincere gratitude to all the panelists, all the organizers, NRC, and thank you for giving us this opportunity to share our thoughts. And back to you, Ali.
Thank you very much, Tayyab. Thank you for such a detailed panel discussion. Now it's a time for session chairman's address, and I request Rana Muhammad Usman Khan Saab, Vice President ICAP, for his address. Rana Saab, over to you, sir.
Thank you very much, Ali. बिस्मिल्लाहिर्रहमानिर्रहीम। अली आवाज पहुंच रही है आप तक?
सर बिल्कुल आ रही है।
Okay, thank you very much. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Valued presenter Umar Mustafa. Although I joined late, but whatever presentation I attended, it was excellent. Mashallah, good work. and panelists. I attended all discussion, very interactive and very effective discussion. Tayyab, Mubashir, Harun, good work. And organizers, chairman, member, NRC, ladies and gentlemen, Assalamu alaikum. First of all, I think I must congratulate NRC for identifying such an informative topic of current importance from both perspectives, actually. Definitely one perspective is the current situation, which is the COVID-19 and post-COVID-19 situation. Of course, whatever is going on, whatever are the impacts of post-COVID activities on Islamic financing products. So definitely this is the time to learn about it, know about it, and be ready for the future. And the second aspect, I think, which is more important to me, is the Islamic financing products overall, which of course, as Mubashir has also said, is growing, making more market share, capturing more market share as compared to conventional banking, of course. एक stage पे लगता था कि शायद जिस तरह एक inferior product हम कोई बेच रहे हैं without any pride, और लोग ऑब्जेक्शन करते थे कि जी ये तो सेम प्रोडक्ट है, कन्वेंशनल बैंकिंग डिफरेंट नाम से बेचती है और इस्लामिक बैंकिंग इसको डिफरेंट नाम से बेचती है. बट now I think the people have started realizing that this is a different product with different spirit, with different intention, objective, of course, objective of cooperation, supporting each other. Definitely the objective is not to extract as much from the borrower, but considering the equality. I mean, if you are putting, let's say, some financing or investment or capital into it, and somebody who is putting efforts into it, so there has to be some equality and some equilibrium of distribution of profits and earnings of the venture. So this spirit basically is now becoming, let's say, a good knowledge to the customers, and people are now attracted towards it, and Islamic products are now capturing more market share. But again, dono sides hain. One is the business side, the other side is the accountant side. Definitely, fee jo hai, they are keeping developing different standards so that jo Islamic business ho raha hai, financing ho rahi hai, products, let's say marketing chal rahi hai, we accountant should be able to capture all those transactions and record it and present it in a way that it should be informative, it should meet all requirements of true and fair presentation. But I think जैसे जैसे market grow करेगी, जैसे जैसे आपका market size grow करेगा, और standards की development की ज़रूरत पड़ेगी, और guidelines की ज़रूरत पड़ेगी. And FI जो है, I think is doing good job, great job, and they'll continue doing it. लेकिन इसकी दूसरी guideline they are developing, I think it's more needed to disseminate all that. जिस तरह अभी तो हमने FAS 30 उठाया और let's say post COVID के context में एक topic लिया और उस पे 1 घंटे का session कर लिया, but I feel more sessions are required on Islamic standards itself actually, ताकि जो लोग इस area में हैं, काम कर रहे हैं, हमारे accountants या bankers even for that matter, तो एक general understanding create करने के लिए, एक general knowledge create करने के लिए, and make them more efficient in applying those standards. I think more sessions are required. और उसमें definitely NRC, SRC, ICAP, we all are available. ये platforms इसीलिए हैं, and we will encourage Umar Sahab if you can develop, let's say, different sessions on that. तो हम उसकी एक series type announce कर सकते हैं. और जिस तरह भी technology ने हम सबको help किया है, I think no need to get together in person, so we can stay wherever we are and we can disseminate that knowledge and technology. So I think the more is needed for that skill development or skill set, क्योंकि जितना proficiency आएगी, skill set develop होगा, तो शायद लोगों का और inclination बढ़ेगा to adopt these products and apply these products. तो एक तो ये side important है. कोविड पे मैं मतलब थोड़ा सा लाइटर नोट पे, क्योंकि बात बड़ी संजीदगी से चल रही है पिछले 1.5 घंटे से. पोस्ट कोविड बहुत सारी चीजें, अभी आजकल हम दोस्तों से मिलते हैं तो आई रियली सॉ फ्यू वेरी स्ट्रेंज थिंग्स. लाइक एक हमारे बड़े सीनियर हैं, उनसे मेरी अगले दिन मुलाकात हुई, वो क्लब में एक्सरसाइज के लिए आए हुए थे. तो मैंने कहा सर आपने वेट बड़ा कम कर लिया है. तो वो कहते हैं कोविड has really benefited me, और मैंने 15 kg वेट कम किया है क्योंकि बाहर का खाना नहीं खा रहे, घर का खाना खा रहे, तो थोड़ा बहुत एक्सरसाइज रेगुलर कर ली है, टाइम बहुत था तो आई गॉट फिट, और मुझे अब मेरे बेटे छेड़ते हैं, मैं उनके बेल्ट्स यूज करता हूँ, उनके ट्राउजर पहन लेता हूँ। तो दिस इज ऑन अ लाइटर नोट। और इसी तरह एक और मेरे दोस्त मिले, तो मैं बड़ा हैरान हुआ, मैं कहा आपसे बड़े दिनों बाद मुलाकात हुई है। कहते हैं आई वाज इन नॉर्दर्न एरियाज, नाउ ही इज सेटिंग अप हिज ओन टूरिज्म कंपनी बेसिकली, जो रिलेशंस वो वहाँ बिल्ड करके आए हैं, तो ही थॉट कि मैं कोई अच्छे टूरिज्म प्लान कर सकता हूँ, तो डेफिनेटली आई कैन गेट इनटू दैट बिजनेस। तो लटे नोट पे मतलब इस कोविड ने बेनिफिट भी दिया है, बट डेफिनेटली थिंग्स आर ऑन अ क्रिटिकल पाथ, और एक क्रिटिकलिटी है, it is there, it will remain there. We have to be vigilant, we have to be careful. Of course, norms हम exercise कर रहे हैं, मेरा ख्याल आप सब लोग इस चीज़ को appreciate करेंगे कि शायद हमने पिछले 3-4 महीने से जब से चीज़ें थोड़ा open up हुई हैं, ease out हुई हैं, हमने किसी से shake hand उस तरह से नहीं किया, the way we used to do it. हगिंग नहीं की। हम तो ये नॉर्थ में, ये लाहौर के एरिया में तो अक्सर इस बात को कहते हैं कि जी अगर मिलें और एक दूसरे को गले न लगाएं तो ऐसे लगता है जैसे मिले ही नहीं है। तो आप उस एनवायरनमेंट में आप ग्रो अप हुए हो और आप 4 महीने से लोगों से मिल रहे हैं, बट यू नॉट इवन शेकिंग हैंड्स। तो ये डिफरेंट नॉर्म्स हैं लाइफ के। आई थिंक ये कोविड का एक पोस्ट कोविड सिचुएशंस होंगी, बट स्टिल थिंग्स आर आई थिंक ऑन अ क्रिटिकल पार्ट। वी नीड टू बी केयरफुल. We still need to exercise a lot of care in offices, in our life. Although चीज़ें ease up हुई हैं, like अभी हमने नॉर्थ में 2 इवेंट्स किए हैं, I really appreciate NRC and CASA for that. CASA का हमने एक्सपोर्ट्स गाला किया है 20, lot of people participated in that, and अल्हम्दुलिल्लाह कोई एडवर्सिटी लेके लोग नहीं निकले वहाँ से। सैप की ट्रेनिंग अभी हुई है, but still things are not opening up to that much. But और इसका definitely बिजनेस पे इम्पैक्ट है, इसका बोरोवर्स पे इम्पैक्ट है, इसका लेंडर्स पे इम्पैक्ट है, और अगर वो इस्लामिक साइड पे डेफिनेटली है तो उसको हमें देखना चाहिए। एंड वी नीड टू क्रिटिकली एग्जामिन, बी विजिलेंट, बी केयरफुल विद दैट। एक चीज मैं और जो सोच रहा था इस सारी डिस्कशन में, उमर साहब इफ यू कैन हेल्प अस आउट, आई थिंक आप और मुबश्शिर और हारून इस पे ये तैयब मिलके एक अच्छा काम कर सकते हैं। IFRS 9 पे इवन बड़े क्वेश्चंस हैं। लाइक मैं बहुत सारे क्लाइंट्स पे जब उसको अप्लाई करता हूँ, तो वो क्लाइंट मुझे कहते हैं कि सर ये मेरा पिछले 10 साल से क्लाइंट है, कस्टमर है, और इसकी आप जो इसका क्लोजिंग बैलेंस देख रहे हैं ये इसी तरह से चलता है, ये तो 3-1 महीने, 4 महीने, 5 महीने मेरे साथ मेरे दबा के रखता है, लेकिन बैड डेट नहीं है, इसने बैड नहीं होना। लेकिन ECL कहती है कि नहीं, आप उसका ट्रेंड देखें और उसकी प्रोविजन डलवा दें। अब हम प्रोविजन डलवा देते हैं, वो प्रोविजन एक पीरियड में डलती है, अगले में रिवर्स हो जाती है। तो ये इस तरह की कुछ चीजें IFRS 9 में जो डाली हुई हैं, तो उसको थोड़ा अगर हम लेट्स से AS 30 के साथ कंपेयर करके कोई कंपैरेटिव स्टडी कर सकें, और कंपैरेटिव स्टडी में अगेन एक तो रिक्वायरमेंट्स है वन साइड, द अदर साइड इज द इम्पैक्ट, के रिसीवेबल पे इम्पैक्ट क्या है, क्या परसेंटेज है जो नॉन परफॉर्मिंग में जारी है, ECL में जारी है in AS 30 and IFRS 9. So which standard is impacting adversely to the banks or to the balance sheets जहाँ पे receivables stand करते हैं, without any change in the fundamentals, like economy तो वही है, customers वही हैं, business उनके वही हैं, performance almost वही है, तो with that उसमें आपके numbers में क्या change आता है। तो this could be another area to look at, और अगर उस पर कोई comparative study करके हम session कर सकें, तो I think that again will be very useful session. I've taken a lot of your time. मैं वैसे चाह नहीं रहा था कि इतनी technical discussion और debate में जाऊं, but looking at your presentation and panel discussion, I got these ideas and I thought that I should be sharing with you. Thank you very much once again. A lot of appreciations to the organizers for having such an informative session.
बहुत शुक्रिया सर, और
all of for sparing this much time and I mean putting all these efforts, and Lord be careful and Allah should
thank you very much sir, thank you very much sir,
thank you very
much, इंशाल्लाह सर कोशिश करेंगे कोशिश करेंगे इंशाल्लाह जो आपकी सजेशंस हैं उसको भी हम देखें, और ये जो आपने सीरीज ऑफ वेबिनार की बात की, हम रिक्वेस्ट करेंगे हमारे आपने जो आइडेंटिफाई ज़ाहिर अंसारी साहब हैं और हमारे पैनलिस्ट हैं हारून साहब हैं, मुबशिर साहब हैं. So with this we conclude today's session, and let me thank our Vice President ICAP, Rana Osman Saab, Umar Ansari Saab, Haroon Tabrez Saab, Tayyab Saab, Mubashir Saab. अभी थैंक यू करना बड़ा आसान हो गया सर वेबिनार पे, नहीं तो लेकिन हम मिस भी करते हैं कि वो अमीन जाहिर है, हम मिस भी करते हैं कि हम प्रॉपर उस तरह से एक्नॉलेज हम कर नहीं पाते जिस तरह हमारे पैनलिस्ट और जिस तरह सारे माशाल्लाह हमारे सारे फेलो मेंबर्स हैं. तो बहुत शुक्रिया, और इंशाल्लाह टाइम अच्छा आ रहा है और अच्छा इंशाल्लाह और आएगा, और फिर हम फिजिकल एक्टिविटीज कुछ तो मैं रिज्यूम की हैं, कुछ और इंशाल्लाह आगे से कंटिन्यू करेंगे. तो बहुत शुक्रिया हमारे स्टाफ का, हमारे जो फेलो मेंबर्स हैं जिन्होंने हमारे साथ ज्वाइन किया है. सो थैंक यू वेरी मच, बहुत शुक्रिया.
ओके जी, सबको अल्लाह हाफिज जी, अपने अपनी ख्याल रखिए.